I would say the main feedback was that people really liked the game mechanics, and that was really good to hear. I mean, we know because of this collaboration, the game has several different aspects which people might like, and it's always interesting to hear what they mostly react to when they talk to us. And what we heard a lot was that they really enjoyed the game loop, and of course they liked the cutscenes and the storyline, but the game loop kind of kept them hooked, which is great to hear. We heard of many players who like the more complex automation games like Factorio, that they also enjoyed Starbirds as a more relaxed experience. And that's actually what we try to do. So that's really reassuring. So in general, Gamescom is always a highlight for me personally, and for us as a team, I would say it's the same. We had our first Toukana Gamescom back with Dorfromantic when we went into the Switch release. It was shortly before the release for the Nintendo Switch. And that was very intense, but also very, very cool. We met lots of cool people. And especially for the team, I would say it's some sort of a bonding experience, right? Because it's such an extreme environment in a way. And you get a direct contact with the player base. So that's really, really cool. Also, you meet lots of other interesting devs. And back then, we came back with lots of motivation. And this time again, the team was a bit bigger. And the game was, well, it seemed to have even more traction in the arena. We even had to do some crowd control. We came back with lots of motivation, and we are now maybe even a bit more optimistic for the release. But on the other hand, we announced the originally targeted release date of the 4th of September during Gamescom. And on the same day, Silksong announced their release date. Team Cherry announced the release date for Silksong, which was also the 4th of September. So that's why we shifted the game's release to the 10th. So that was a bummer in a way, to be honest. But we also want to give both games enough space to gain their own traction and so on. So it was a obvious decision at some point. Of course, we had to discuss it for a few days, but then we decided on moving and shifting the game. But in general, the experience was great, and it's a highlight. I would also say, if other indie devs are reading this, or if they are interested in hearing maybe my personal or our Toukana opinion on these events, I would say these events are maybe not the best if you want to kind of measure it as a marketing beat, But I think it's really great for networking and for meeting other people, and also as a team building thing. Yeah. So in the early access version, you will see that in the later levels, the complexity of the networks you need to build really scales up. On the one hand, you get more buildings which have different processes which they do. So, for example, they combine two resources into one, or they transform one type of resource into another. And for some of the buildings, you need energy. So you need solar panels or reactors or other energy sources to actually get everything moving. And so the complexity and maybe even the puzzle factor of how you build your production networks really scales up. And I would say that's mostly where the complexity lies. And then also it's the chain of what types of products you need to create something else from two of these products. So it has like a tree of depth at some point of layers of things you need to produce. Then also the environmental aspect has a bigger impact later, because the asteroids have more plateau layers, which also changes how you play on them. Then you have different frozen resources, so ice caps of methane or oxygen, water, and other stuff. And this also makes things a bit more complex. But I would say the general core of plopping down buildings and connecting them by hand and really having to think of how you use the space or the surface area of the asteroids, that kind of stays the same as a core element in the gameplay. So new things that were not present in the demo are quite a big range of additional buildings. So buildings that allow you to heat things, buildings that split things, buildings that combine things, and also some buildings that just use resources. So kind of like the main station, which is like a goal where you have to deliver things to. Later on, you also have some buildings which act in the same way, but you decide where to put them. And so this really changes the affordance and things that you as a player have to produce. Yeah. Then we have energy networks, which make the whole thing a bit more interesting and maybe even a bit more challenging. You have different ways of producing this energy, and then in some later star systems, there will probably even be additional challenges where you might not get enough sunlight. That's not in the current build, but these are things we are thinking of and trying out. You will have energy producing things on the asteroids. So there will be more unknown things that you discover on the asteroids. We have the plateaus, different ice layers. We have one of the biggest changes that's like upgrades for the buildings. So players can actually improve the effectiveness and optimize the networks also by upgrading certain parts of the networks. So a certain building that's like a node point and kind of keeps everything from moving faster. Later on, you will be able to upgrade these buildings, or you can upgrade rockets, and now they can carry more resources and stuff like that. So that's a big feature that's also in the early access version. And then we have many achievements. So everything you do will kind of reward you, and depending on how well you optimize your level playthroughs and how many stars you collect as a score, you can buy more of the upgrades. And when I say buy, I don't mean microtransactions or anything like this. It's just the rewards you get for how you play the levels. You can use these to improve and progress your gameplay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question. It's one of the biggest ones we asked ourselves when we started with the project. What type of game do we actually want to make, and for whom? And I mean, we on the Toukana side, our approach is always to make games that are relaxing in a way, maybe even a bit meditative, but they have a certain systemic core that gets challenging later on. So it's easy to hop in, but it really challenges you if you want to. You can play them in a casual way, but you can also really go into the depth and min-max how you play. In Dorfromantik, we had the same thing with the really extreme high scores that kind of popped up at some point because players are really going deep into the mechanics. And here in Starbirds, our approach was to have a game that on the surface is like a chill Factorio maybe, but then later on it really challenges you and builds on the things you learn in the game system. And we try to have a game that speaks to maybe casual players as well as players who are genre veterans in the automation genre. So our ideal player base could be a spectrum between those two player types. So, for example, someone who usually finds games like Factorio a bit overwhelming maybe can have a really chill and easy way to hop into the genre with Starbirds and then learn and get better and maybe even start to have this itch to optimize and improve the way they play. And this is possible in Starbirds. And on the other hand, players who usually play the more complex automation or strategy games, they can have a chill time with Starbirds to kind of unwind, but they can also go deeper than players go on the surface and go really into how much resources do I deliver per minute and how can I optimize my network. And I think that also has lots of value and satisfactory gameplay. Yeah. We wanted to do something else after Dorf Romantic, so we really felt like after nearly 3 years of working on the game, we needed some fresh air in a way. And luckily, through a contact we made on Gamescom in 2022, I think it was, we already were in talks with Kurz gesagt. And we actually started working on a mobile version for Dorf Romantic after the Gamescom 2022. But we kind of realized that we needed to, at least for a while, also do something else, or at least, get the creative juices flowing again. And so we decided on moving on to a new project first, and that was doing something else. So we again created a few different prototypes, and we talked to Kurzgesagt about them, and we pitched a few, and one of them was is inspired by this asteroid mining video, which is on the Kurzgesagt channel. It's, I think, already a few years old. And we found the fantasy of that really interesting, that you are in space and you mine asteroids and you move on from asteroid to asteroid or from star system to star system. We found this idea of progress, maybe even some sort of a roguelite approach, really interesting and intriguing. And so it's something we started working on really early. And the first things we wanted to get right was the actual core mechanic of placing down things and connecting them on these 3-dimensional objects. So the early prototypes already gameplay-wise felt similar to what we have now. Of course, they were not as polished and didn't look as good, but we knew that this core needs to work and feel smooth and maybe even something you don't really think about when you do it, but it was very challenging to do. And of course, we have some core design approaches. We like games that are easy to hop in, that that communicate what you do or what type of a game it is very easily, maybe even only through a screenshot, that are colorful and friendly and welcoming, but have a certain systemic depth. So this asteroid mining approach really fit really well into these constraints. So Dorf Romantic was a much bigger success than we had imagined in our wildest dreams, I would say. Of course, we tried to make a game that's successful enough for us as a studio to continue. I mean, we came directly from university and we wanted to build a sustainable workplace for us in a way, and establish a new studio in the German games industry. That was the goal. So Dorf Romantic had ambition on our side, but we would have never imagined such a big success. So that came out of the blue in a way, or at least it was surprising. But it's great because then we were even more independent and we could continue on the game in our own pace, and the same freedom we wanted for Starbirds. But of course, exactly like you say, there's a huge expectation coming with it. When the first game was a success, people expect big things and good quality. And of course, we also have similar expectations towards our work, right? So we knew the game needs to be very polished when we go into early access, and should already have a smoothly playable experience, which gives players some depth. And yeah, this expectation management wasn't easy, especially since we didn't do such an open social media campaign as we did with Dorf Romantics. So, for example, during Dorf Romantics development, we already shared early prototypes and early versions online to kind of gauge what people think of it. And this time we waited a bit longer until we showed things, because we knew the expectations were higher, and we wanted to already show things that we felt comfortable with, right, from a quality standpoint. And so that changed a bit how we worked, and it was a challenge in a way, yeah. But now, as the demo was welcomed with good reviews and lots of interested players, I think we're in a good spot. Starbirds is, on the technical side of things, much more complex than Dorf Romantic, also from a development standpoint. And the semi-procedural generation of the asteroids was not easy to do, because they get quasi-generated in real time, the meshes. Also the plateaus on them, and also the pipes you kind of drag by hand. These are meshes which get generated in runtime. And to get all of that working more or less without glitches, like meshes kind of getting stretched and kind of floating around somewhere else, it's not easy. And so I think that's an achievement for the team, definitely. Also translating a 2D art style, the 2D vector art style from the Kurzgesagt videos, into something that's tangible, that works in 3D as a game art style, that was a challenge too. And so really early on in the development, we had visual prototypes. So we had 3D prototypes that were only there to try out how can we translate this 2D style to something that looks good in 3D, has a recognizability as well, but is also not purely a Kurzgesagt style, but it's like a mix of what we do, Toukana, as a studio that makes 3D games with hopefully fresh art styles, but also something that is a clear, recognizable style, and has a brand compatibility also with Kurzgesagt. That was a requirement for us and for both teams. So we really worked on that for a while. So I'm proud of that, definitely, because people usually come to us and say, "Wow, the game looks really cool and really interesting art style." I even had a few talks at Gamescom with other devs that asked how we actually did it and what is the technical background of the art style, and so that's cool to be able to talk to people about that, and have something interesting to say, maybe, and then another achievement, I would say, is having both teams bring their different experiences and skill sets together. I think that really enriches the game, and so I'm proud of both teams in a way, that we found a way to make it work. And now the ultimate challenge maybe is to see if people really enjoy the game, and if they do, then I'm very happy about that. So as both studios have a bird as their mascot, we obviously like birds. And so while working on the game, we always thought, what is this civilization that does this mining? Do we want these to be normal humans? And the easy answer was always no, we could have birds doing all of that. And creating a narrative around them kind of felt natural, also because that's kurz gesagt forte in a way, right? We know the birds from the videos. So creating a new kind of birds, the starbirds, and having them travel through space and having like a ragtag crew that experiences an interesting or maybe even mysterious storyline that kind of is like a red line for players, or like a narrative that guides you through the game. That was a thing which developed during the first months or maybe during the first year of development. And it became clear to us that that's the thing we want to do and we want to try. And so the narrative and the cutscenes and the crew birds became more important in the whole process. So yeah, I think the game now is a balanced experience that has narrative and has these crew bird characters, and has Steve as a narrator in some scenes. But on the other hand, we wanted to have a game that's also very clearly a game focused on mechanics, right? It's not necessarily a game that is only a story-based game. So we had to find a balance for both of these things, or both of these aspects. So while playing through the current build, it really depends on the type of player you are, I would say. But if you are quick, you might be finished in 7 to 8 hours. But that means really you're being quick and maybe skipping some of the additional levels, or not min-maxing, not retrying things. But if you go in depth, the game offers many, many hours on top. You can replay every level a few times to get a better score, to upgrade your buildings and your processes. And yeah, so there's lots of replayability included already, I would say, in the early access release. So I would say if you want to experience the whole thing in a deep manner, I would say more than 10 hours is in there. And during the early access phase, of course, we will add more content. So back when we made Dorf Romantic, we thought a lot about doing it with the help of a publisher. But luckily in the team, back then we were 4, and during early access we grew to 5 people with an additional freelancer. We had the skills in the team to actually do marketing ourselves. So for us, we didn't really see the big added value of a publisher. Of course, a publisher can give you lots of security. So during development, we have the funding, and then come a release, the publisher will take care of all the marketing efforts. But we also heard of several of our closer contacts in the industry, also from other indie teams, that they or some of them had bad experiences with publishers. So we were quite skeptical back then. And as I said, because we saw the skills in our team to do it ourselves, and we also wanted to learn about the market and the industry, we decided to do it ourselves. And now with Starbirds, as the team has grown a little bit and we have our partners in the project, kurz gesagt, they also publish themselves in a way, right? So they have lots of experience in that area, not necessarily in games per se, but they know the internet very well, of course. So we felt like this collaboration brings together 2 teams with different but very enriching experience. So we decided it just makes sense to do it ourselves again. So we are kind of co-publishing the game together. And yeah, so that was the idea behind it. if our team wouldn't be as flexible in that regard, so for example, if we wouldn't have someone who's interested in doing marketing, or if you would have someone who's not interested in lots of business development, right? These are all aspects you need to kind of take care of when you self-publish. Then, of course, we would have thought about maybe talking to a marketing agency or even to a publisher. But luckily, as Dorfromantik was also very successful for us, we are very independent. So we can fund a project ourselves. So we are also not dependent on funding from a publisher. So many different factors that kind of influence this decision. But we totally see the value in a publisher if the team has a different background. All of our industry friends, we are talking a lot about these issues. We feel like the industry doesn't get easier or more relaxed, especially for newcomers. It's really hard to actually gain enough traction or visibility for a project. So we feel like this is one of the main challenges for teams. Of course, the game needs to be at least solid. That's a given. But on top now, visibility or how to actually reach people is one of the most important things, especially since there are even more and more releases every day, every week. And the market is kind of flooded at the moment, I would say, right? So there's like a general buzz of releases, and to kind of stick out from that's the big challenge. So this makes it hard for newcomers. For studios that are already established in the industry, there's a huge supply in a way of interesting games, interesting products. So when you go on Steam and you look for the next game you want to play, there's such a huge offering of different interesting titles, or maybe even titles in a similar genre, that it really, it's in a way a huge competition between all the different studios, bigger and smaller ones. And I'm always interested to see how things develop and to research, and I'm usually looking at all the different releases every week to see how it goes for them, or what type of player base they might be catering to. But it makes the whole industry very competitive. And I think what is very important right now, especially for indies, to kind of be connected with one another and talk to one another and share experiences. Because if you don't, you get into situations where you just can't really decide in an informed way sometimes, and this can actually make or break a success sometimes. So yeah, definitely inform yourselves. And we know of lots of studios, like friends of ours that are struggling. Some projects don't make enough money back, and it's hard. I really, I don't know. It feels like the industry is getting a bit more tense at the moment, and hopefully over the next years things will soothe out a little bit more. But yeah, it's hard to say. So my opinion on AI is ambivalent, maybe. I see potential. I see that it can help in many different ways, and maybe even redefine some processes, right? I think that has lots of potential. It can save lots of time in many different tasks. On the other hand, I see that either the quality is not good enough in different things. If we talk about art, for example, I feel that often AI art is very generic and it doesn't really help a project to stand out necessarily. So I really have to say I prefer human-made art and human-made assets. So that's clear. There are some technical processes where AI can really help and speed things up, and I'm not necessarily against that. I think it allows some smaller teams to create amazing things, maybe in a shorter time frame, maybe in a more effective way. So I'm not totally against that. But I am, however, against using AI to fully replace humans in certain team constellations, right? So I have a problem with that. But incorporating it into different workflows, there I see some potential, and I also see that some types of workflows might just get redefined and not necessarily totally replaced. So as you see, I'm kind of torn in between these two perspectives, which I both find very legit. So yeah, it's not easy, and we as a team, we are still we feel like we're observing how all of this kind of plays out. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about. So me personally, I like games that have a certain systemic backbone that kind of gets you hooked and gets you thinking about, okay, how can I actually improve how I play, right? And I feel that that's also what inspires us to make the types of games we make. For example, we're huge fans of Slay the Spire, for example. You know, that's a fantastic game. It has depth, it's challenging, it's still kind of relaxing, you know? It's not too actiony, not too hyped. You can chill on the couch and play it on the Steam Deck, for example. That's awesome. And still it has some depth, so you can really get into it and take on new challenges and see that you as a player progress and improve in how you play. And this is, I think, one of the big things which we like about games and game systems. I mean, we have the background of having studied game design, so for us, obviously, the approach of the game, like how we create a game system, that's very interesting to us, to really get into the gritty details, you know? And so making only a cozy game without trying to kind of judge cozy games as a general thing, I think that wouldn't be enough for us. And so my personal approach is I sometimes play cozy games, but it's similar to what you said. Most of them might not have enough game design depth at some point for me. But I also feel that they are very important for the industry overall. I mean, there are many people who are not as used to maybe the more complex game systems, and they need a way to ease in, right? And so I feel like cozy games allow a bigger part of the player base to play games and unwind. That's, yes, exactly. They don't have lots of time on their hands, and they might be a bit overwhelmed by games that are more actiony, more hyped up, more complex and challenging in their mechanics. So I think the industry, or the gaming industry in the whole, needs all of these things. It's also an art form, right? So it has to have different manifestations, and in general, if you look back, every year there's so much new things, so many new things, new approaches, new game systems coming from the indie space. It's always enriching, and it always redefines what games actually can be. And I think that's very important. In the end, it's all something that cross-informs each other and remixes itself. And this is also what makes games so interesting as a medium and an art form. Yeah. So first of all, that's mostly a resource kind of thing. We are still indie, right? So we kind of need to think about what to focus on first. For us, PC is the high priority right now. Obviously, we all like the Steam Deck, so we will definitely look into that. I can't promise when, but there will be official controller support, so it will be more playable on the Steam Deck than it is right now. I know of many people, even though it's not fully supported on the Steam Deck, they are already playing on the Steam Deck using the touch controls. Seems to work, like these mouse emulation touchpads. But later on during the early access period, we want to have it run well on the Steam Deck. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. We want to include real controller support for the Steam Deck. And when it comes to other consoles, other platforms, that's something we need to see. So at first we want to see, does the game gain enough traction? And then we will think about bringing it to other platforms if that makes sense for us.